live. It is Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, March 5th, year of our Lord 2025. It is 10 o'clock a.m. because, sometimes the show is not on time. Sometimes it's 2 hours late because I'm going to be on a train. It is another dark day, but, and I would say, but the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, but the sun is not shining, actually, at least not in Bridgeport, Connecticut. It's dark and overcast. I'm going to try to talk as little as possible today because I am on a train and I'm sure I'm flitting in and out of Audible, but we've got a bunch of things to talk about. Cactus, do you want to do the introduction?
You're watching Dog Show TV, an effing revolution in morning television.
You are watching Dog Show TV, and it is an effing revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features of it is that I may do it from a train 2 hours late. And another one of the revolutionary features of it is that news might break 2 minutes before we do the show, and Shane Harris might text me about it. And I might say, do you want to come on at the top of the hour and talk about that? And he might say, wait a minute, you're doing it at 10? And I might say, yeah, because I'm on a train. And he might say, okay, send me a link. And so he might be here. And another one of the revolutionary aspects is that the Supreme Court might drop a case that, a few minutes before we do the show, and Holly might text me and say, hey, big Supreme Court news, and I might say, hey, let's talk about it on the show. So, all of that is to say we are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Shane and Holly. And again, I'm going to try to say as few words as possible because I don't know how many of this anybody is hearing. So, Shane, what do we know about the sudden freeze of intelligence sharing between the United States and the Ukrainians?
Well, it is sudden, but not unexpected. Folks will remember that President Trump said yesterday he was suspending military aid to Ukraine. This is all part of his attempt to coerce Zelensky into, signing a deal with Putin. And the intelligence sharing that the U.S. provides is a part of that. It's still a little bit unclear to me how much this covers. John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, went on Fox Business News this morning and confirmed it. So just to be clear for everyone, the CIA is saying this is happening. This isn't just reporting. My friend Julian Barnes at the New York Times is saying that it doesn't cover any intelligence that relates directly to the protection of Ukrainian troops has not been put on hold, but presumably that would not cover any kind of intelligence we give the Ukrainians to attack Russian troops. And this is really one of the key things about this, is that not giving Ukraine intelligence to prosecute the war is like tying a hand behind their back or blinding them, or, pick a metaphor. They depend upon the intelligence that we and the British, and principally I think those two, provide to conduct offensive operations, to fight. And it may be heartening that there's still intelligence coming to them for defensive purposes, but this is a really significant thing to cut this off, and it is only can have one aim, which is to force Zelensky to, I don't even like saying come to the table. To my mind, this is about forcing him to concede something. And we don't even really know what the parameters are of any kind of peace deal. But this is not how allies treat each other. And I do not think that after today, we could credibly be called an ally of Ukraine. We certainly cannot be called a reliable ally of Ukraine. And that is deeply disappointing and shameful on its own. And this is something that I am confident our longstanding allies, particularly in the West, will look at with great concern. Because I don't think that if you are if you have a commander-in-chief that is willing to cut off intelligence and military support to a country that is actually fighting for its existence, I think you might cut it off to countries you just don't like because they're doing shit you don't like. And I think that our allies will look at this and wonder, what the hell happened to us and who are we? I think this is significant beyond the deeply important, just tactical setback that this creates for Ukraine. It could be turned back on. John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, said, now that Vladimir Zelensky said all the nice things that he said about President Trump and he wants peace, maybe it could be turned back on again. But presumably it could be turned right back off if we don't like what they're doing. So we're really playing with people's lives when we do this, and our other allies are going to notice that, I think.
Yeah. So when I look at this as someone who, worked for the agency, to me, this is an example of things that could increasingly happen where intelligence officers are asked to do or not do something that it's not. I mean, there's nothing illegal about this. The president can decide and the director can decide who to share intelligence with. Even sharing intelligence with Russia would be at their discretion, frankly. But it's not illegal, and there's a broad range of things that the intelligence community may be asked to do that are not illegal, but they are clearly counter to U.S. national security and U.S. interests around the world, long-standing U.S. interests around the world. And so what is an intelligence officer, an intelligence agency, a career, body? What are they supposed to do? Because they've sworn an oath to the Constitution, and there's nothing illegal about this, but there's clearly no way to, there's no, it would be it's their judgment whether that this is endangers the national security of the United States. So the CIA could be used in illegal ways and has been in its history by the executive, in all manner of things which could happen. But to me, from the beginning, it's been, I've just been very cognizant of all of the legal ways that the intelligence community could be used in a nefarious way that really endangers us, certainly our allies, and just puts career officers in a terrible position because there's just no there's no allowance for while the president of the United States is now a danger to the national security of the United States and his decisions are endangering us. There's no sort of loophole there for a careerist. So it's very sad for me to see, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if I fully expect we're gonna get to a point where we are and we've shared intelligence with Russia on discrete things over the years, to be clear, like counterterrorism and things like that. So it's not unprecedented that we would share intel, but on this issue, I think it's probably a matter of time, and very alarming.
And you mentioned something too, Holly, about career intelligence officers who will feel very caught in the middle of this, and it's worth kind of noting to people that the relationships between the CIA operations folks, particularly who work on Ukraine and who have experience there, it's very tight with their Ukrainian counterparts. The contemporary Ukrainian intelligence apparatus was essentially built by the CIA in partnership with Ukraine. The chief of the SBU, Vasyl Malyuk, was at CIA headquarters on Friday, meeting with people in the operations directorate while Zelensky was at the White House. It was also his birthday, notably, so not a very happy birthday for him last Friday. But these people they know one another. They have fought together. They have built things together. They have common goals. And, this is a reminder, right, of what happens when you have, we have an intelligence system that is staffed by people who are career experts, and it's run by those people, but it is directed by elected policymakers and the people who they choose. And you are seeing, as vast a pendulum swing as you possibly could imagine between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. Right? Elections have consequences. This is one of them. They have consequences for Ukraine, and those CIA officers, I have no doubt, are anguished over this right now. But we'll also be very clear-eyed and we'll totally understand this is what happens. And I mean, and we'll hopefully look for a way to move on with our counterparts. But like people will feel this. We should say when we say the CIA has cut off the intelligence, Donald Trump has cut off the intelligence, right? I can't imagine that there is a constituency, at least any kind of significant one, within the CIA's operations directorate to do this.
Yeah, so let me ask you about the Ratcliffe suggestion that this would be temporary and short-lived. What do we know about the duration of it? What do we know about where Trump is now vis-a-vis the Ukrainians now that Zelensky has, made the statement that he made yesterday, which is to say not an apology, but a willingness to have a ceasefire under the right circumstances?
So, I think Ratcliffe, as you said, suggested that the spigot could be turned back on again, as it were. So the duration of this could be as long as the president wants it to be, right? And there may be kind of a long tail. It may not just be like you turn it off and everything stops all at once, but there may be like a slight delay in feeling it on the ground. But they will feel it pretty quickly because this will apparently apply to targeting of weapon systems, and they won't be able to do that if they don't have the intelligence. They won't be able to use these weapons we've been giving them and some of the long-range capabilities we've given them. As to where Trump is on this, in his address to Congress last night, he acknowledged Zelensky's statement and seemed favorable about that and seemed to think that this was a good development, that Zelensky is kind of apologizing. He's trying to make nice and come back to the table. And of course, Zelensky had said yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, that he was willing to sign this minerals deal that the administration wants in exchange for security guarantees or assistance. I wouldn't use the word guarantee with this administration. Yeah, that's kind of where it is. Presumably, though, Zelensky is going to have to do something here to give some concrete demonstration to Trump that he's serious. The tweet went some of the way towards doing that, clearly, because Trump mentioned it in his speech, but we're just going to have to wait and see. We don't know. Like I said, I could imagine Trump turning it off again. Part of the problem here too that's so frustrating and trying to figure out, where does it go from here? No one has sat down at this, metaphorical table that everyone wants to be coming to. Like, what are the terms of the deal? And something that doesn't really get enough attention, I think, is that it is the current assessment of U.S. intelligence and some of our allies as well that Putin is not prepared to negotiate if negotiation means giving something up. Like, they are very clear on this, and I've heard this from very senior people in multiple services. He's not giving anything up because he thinks he's winning, right? And he will only think he's winning even more by recent events. So as a negotiating tactic, if that's what Trump is trying to do, this is foolish because you're dealing with a counterparty that has no intention of conceding anything to you. So I don't know where Trump thinks he's driving on this. The only thing that has been really clear to me in the way that he has handled Zelensky and what he's doing, and I think, again, this is something that goes underappreciated, is Donald Trump hates Ukrainians. He has a long-standing distrust of the Ukrainian system, of Ukrainian politicians, of Zelensky in particular, and it is really deep-rooted. It's a very real thing. And this is why he is being so incredibly tough on Ukraine and doing nothing to force Russia to make any kind of concession.
I just want to comment on the ally piece of it. There were some questions in the chat about, again, the European sort of partners making up the difference or whatever. And that's just like with military aid. I mean, the CIA in particular has been, the centerpiece of a lot of their intelligence strategies as well. Like just by sheer size, they can't compete with CIA in terms of human collection. Now, the British do have an extensive signals intelligence operation. So there's that, and there are some other capabilities there. But in terms of just sort of sheer, mass of resources, particularly on the human side, I mean, my experience is that they're pretty dependent on us. So there's that. But I also want to raise something that I've been thinking about too, and that is, the counterintelligence game could really be shifting in all of this, in that the types of services that target us, that is, try to recruit our officers and gain information from us. Honestly, if I'm an ally, a former allied service, I'm going to want sources inside the American government, frankly. And also the motivations, if again, I'm not advocating anything illegal, but if you're a career intelligence officer and you've been, and I can't emphasize enough how you're just literally boiled in Russia, do not go anywhere near Russia, don't, Russia's the enemy, danger, danger, danger. Like, that is just like the air you breathe at the agency, and also China, Iran, and some others. But it's both a holdover from obviously the Soviet days, but then a present reality of what an aggressive service they are, as well as increasingly in the last 10 years, a major geopolitical adversary. But even in the good times when we were sort of getting along with ours, I mean, huge counterintelligence risk. They were always just an incredibly aggressive service. The spy wars never died down in the interregnum between the Cold War and what we have now. So so to then shift to be more pro-Russia in foreign policy and possibly in intelligence operations is just it's a brain break for career officers. And so again, if I'm France, anyway, I'm not going to comment on what I know about certain services, but if I'm a Western European intelligence service who might have not expended any energy on collecting on the United States because they're an ally and a partner, I don't know. I'm going to be trying to penetrate the CIA and try to get sources and find out what the hell's going on in the American government right now. And I think it's a target-rich environment, given how alienated and mistreated a lot of federal workers are, not just in the agency, but there could be sources in other agencies as well. So the counterintelligence risk of everything that they're doing is significant, and it's incredibly novel. I feel like this really is shifting the spy game, or could. It's not yet. I think it's early days, obviously, but there's a lot of really huge follow-on ramifications for the intelligence business.
Yeah, I think, and I've talked to folks just in the past couple of weeks looking at, all the firings that are going on and looking at the disruptions at the FBI. And this is not, by the way, to say that it's justifiable for a aggrieved American government employee to go out and spy for a foreign country. But it happens.
Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, this is absolutely. No. I mean, this is exactly what our service is.
Ev is here to recruit us all to Canadian intelligence.
Yeah, we would go looking for people to.
The Cactus would be a great Canadian asset. Trust me about that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Shane, thank you for stopping by.
All right, today. I'm going to go report some more, and you'll read all about it later. Okay. Bye, guys.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Thanks, ma'am. So, Ev, what is on your mind this morning? Did you watch the State of the Union joint session of Congress speech last night?
No, I didn't. I heard it through my Waldo. No, I heard it through my wall partly, but I didn't have the courage. I couldn't gather the courage to listen to it actually. Anything that I missed or anything that I should know about during, like I've followed it through Blue Sky, but it sounded like some rambling, nonsense rambling. And yeah, so what are the key elements that will remain in history?
Well, I don't know because
I
I
didn't watch
didn't
it. I
listen
compared
to
to
it. I didn't watch it, and I didn't follow the Blue Sky, and I know nothing about it except that it was very long. That's all I know about it. So
I
if
didn't
you
watch
heard
it
it,
either. I didn't really. I mean, it was it. You could probably write the speech yourself, Ev, just knowing the nonsense and the propaganda. I think any of us could probably guess what's in the speech, and that's why I didn't feel the need to watch it. And also, his voice makes me, break out in hives. But I did. I was interested in like the how the Democrats would respond, and I don't know. Like everybody's basically the advice for Democrats is like all over the map. But basically, the takeaway for Democrats is like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So like if you go, then you're normalizing it, but if you like storm out, then you're like playing into his hands. And it just seems like Democrats are in this double bind where there's like it's no win. Personally, I was hoping, I would if it were me, I would just boycott the whole thing. Um, I thought the most effective thing that I saw on social media was that one Democratic member apparently followed behind Trump as he came in with a sign that said "This is not normal," and I thought that was probably
Yeah.
one of the best things. And then they took her sign away after a minute, but yeah.
okay. So I have a question for Ev. If we took the Llama open source large language model
Mm-hmm.
and we trained it on all of the Trump data, Trump speech data. So we just fed it and trained it on everything Trump has said in public over the last few years. And then we had it write the State of the Union address that he was going to give last night. How close do you think a large language model trained on Trump's speech could get to writing the speech that he actually gave?
I think Trump is a particular character in that sense because he is not consistent. There's no real, like he could say one thing one day and the complete opposite the other day. So um, it is harder. Like if you were taking all of your content, I think that we could draw a kind of predictive analysis and have something like a somewhat plausible speech. With Trump, I don't know. I really, really, really don't know. It's like his stances on Ukraine are so hard to follow that, like, I don't think it would be. We would have the style. We would have the kind of rhetoric, aggressivity. But on the content, I don't think it would be particularly good. And especially like, who could have predicted what's happening right now 3 months ago? It everyone kind of seems to be taken aback, even though we know the man. So I don't think that AI can do better, but maybe we would be surprised.
What do you think, Holly? If you used only as a reference point things that he has actually said and ignored all political context, ignored, is he basically just a large language model that's, trained on, the last 10 years of Newsmax and Fox News and his own rhetoric? I mean, he's kind of like a large language model that's trained on its own output, right? He kind of vomits back the stuff that he's said before. Could you actually just write Trump speeches by kind of picking the probability that words follow the word before?
I mean, I'm not an expert on AI, so I defer to Ev's expertise there, but I just feel like as myself, like I feel like I could easily write a speech. I mean, maybe we can't predict, like a few months ago, Ev's right that we couldn't predict, exactly what but if you took all of the sort of talking points and things he said in the last 3 weeks or last month, and then, certainly at right-wing media time, I mean, that's one of the, reasons it's so effective, right, is because it's so repetitive and they just like hit the, it's like multiple different sources in the ecosphere just saying basically the same thing over and over and over and over, and then echoing each other and backing each other up and using the same phrases and language even. I feel like I feel like it's pretty predictable. And honestly, what I saw on social media about what he said was, I mean, you could obviously guess he's going to brag about like, oh, all the money they're saving. He's going to talk about fraud in the government. He's going to like, throw the civil servants under the bus. He's going to like go on about how amazing Doge is and all the savings. He's going to like bash Ukraine. I mean, I don't none of it was a surprise to me.
Can I be provocative a little bit? If it's and it's not in good faith, but if it's so previsible, like if we can predict what he's gonna say so easily, why aren't we like acting upon it if we know what's coming?
Well, I don't think we've not known if he means what he says, or like what, like this tariff business, right? Like he's been doing this tariff like strip tease, for since the first term really, and it's like, and actually a friend of mine.
Tariff strip tease is a very good name for a band.
Take a little leg and then you take it back, But that's what it is basically. And actually a friend of mine who is much more, I have no financial expertise. I don't do that. I don't do money at all of any kind. But I was talking to a friend of mine who does do money, and his view was that the tariff strip tease was a way of manipulating the markets to benefit people in the know. So like he threatens tariffs, maybe the market crashes, then people buy up a bunch of stock or whatever, and then he like, okay, just joking, the tariffs aren't going back, and then the markets go back up. And I thought that was interesting. So on the one hand, but still on the one hand, he has a long-standing love affair with tariffs that goes back to the 1980s that is inexplicable and just completely uninformed and ignorant. But on the other hand, you could see how he's, uses policy. And then this crypto is another area where he's clearly using policy to manipulate markets, undoubtedly to his own benefit. So I don't know. So it's not that what he says is like predictably awful and within certain lanes. I think the unpredictability is like, oh, what is he actually going to do about that?
Yeah, no, I think you're.
So Ed.
What's that?
No, go ahead.
No, I think you're totally right. I actually saw something on Twitter Blue Sky about how Trump would have said like 4 or 6 years ago that a good economic crisis would actually help him. Like people would want to go back to when America was great after an economic crisis. So it would be a reason why he's so much trying to create chaos with the economy, because you think that if the economy really is really fucked up, then is all Make America Great Again stance will really appeal to people. Is it just nonsense, or does it make sense?
And do you have a theory about this? JVL had a piece yesterday about this on the Bulwark.
I mean, look, he's, I think the technical term is relentlessly full of shit. So if you break the economy in order to then promise to fix the economy, I'm sure that's what he would do. That said, it would not be a good thing for him to break the economy to set that up. Presidents are judged first and foremost by economic performance. But I want to ask, as since the last time we have chatted on the show, the tariffs have actually gone into effect, and talk about current sentiment in Canada, what has happened since the tariffs went into effect, and what are people expecting?
Well, already this morning, the administration said that it could back off from tariffs, so we don't really trust anything anymore. Justin Trudeau probably made his last appearance as Prime Minister yesterday, and he was quite straightforward and pretty harsh about the situation. He mentioned that okay, Trump is playing with Putin, and he really seems to be helping him. On the other hand, he's attacking his allies. Make it make sense. So this is what the government is saying. It's really and Justin Trudeau straightforwardly said that it was stupid, which is again not usual for a Canadian, B, a politician, very undiplomatic language. So that is what is happening on the political front. In the population, honestly, we are seeing pieces in the newspapers about towns that are on the borders, in New Brunswick, in Quebec, towns that are split by a river where you just have to cross the bridge and you are in the US or in Canada. And what these pieces are saying is that both Americans are kind of apologizing to us. They are very sorry about what's going on, but also that it creates some tension. People who have do snowmobiles and just they group cousins across the borders or families, and people are not talking to each other. Somewhat what was happening during the pandemic, but worse because these relationships were already tense from 5 years ago, and that trust bonds and relationships are eroding on the border cities in Montreal, Quebec City, Ottawa, Toronto. I think we are still trying to figure out what's going on. It doesn't really have an impact yet. In grocery stores and liquor stores, they have stripped all the alcohol from the U.S. from the stalls, so it visually we see it, but we're still figuring things out.
Ev, do you think all of this Trump, generated antipathy and the sort of tensions there, does this help the Liberal Party? Do you think this changes the dynamics in the election?
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think that this morning's poll, Conservative were at 33% and Liberals were at 32%. This was unimaginable 4 months ago. This summer, nobody could believe that the Liberals would be back in power for their fifth mandate. And now
the language we've been using until this crisis was the Liberals are dead men walking, right? That was how extreme it was, and now they're in a not terrible position all of a sudden.
Well, they look like the reasonable people in the grown-ups in the room. They've been there for a long time. It will provide stability, what we are really lacking at the moment. And the other guy is just the same sort of crazy. So we don't want to elect that. So it will be an interesting race. I'm not even sure that we will go in elections. So I think that the Liberal Party race is finishing on March 16th or March 9th. So we're really close to having a new leader. And everyone was kind of believing that as soon as he would be elected, we would go into elections. But things are so unstable that I think maybe we will want to just pacify stuff and wait for election in September.
That's interesting. And so you could imagine if Carney or whoever wins just becomes prime minister for 6 months and is perceived to handle the situation effectively, you could imagine them going in with a reasonably strong position because they're, while the liberals have been in power for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years or something, 10, the leader in question will be a new and relatively fresh face and doesn't have all the Justin Trudeau, who, not with Holly, of course, but with Canadians, has a lot of baggage.
Yeah, and
No
Mark
baggage
Carney,
here. JT's always good with me. Always welcome, JT.
yeah. If we turn back to U.S., have you seen that during the speech yesterday, Trump would have said to John Roberts that he would remember what Roberts have done for him?
Yeah, I
I
saw
did
something
not.
about that.
I,
I saw something reported that he said something to that effect to John Roberts, but of course I didn't. I wasn't watching, so.
but
So
was
yeah,
that a reference to the immunity decision, or was it a negative
I don't
thing,
know.
as in,
oh,
I'm
it was
keeping
like
score?
thanks man.
Oh
Oh, I
boy.
see.
Yeah.
Uh, well, on
Well,
the other side,
Matt, do you want to talk about do you want to this is a good transition to the SCOTUS case today, Ben?
sure. Happy to talk about that with as always, full disclosure that my wife runs an organization that is very directly affected by that case, and so, it's I don't want to pretend to be disinterested. What do you
Sure.
want to know, Holly?
Well, first of all, just in case people don't know, kind of, so the SCOTUS decision came down and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Ben, but I believe it's with regards to payments that for work already done by USAID to USAID contractors that had been frozen. And then I'm not sure if it pertains to sort of the more sort of emergency life or death sort of aid as well that had been exempted from the freeze at one point. Again, fuzzy on the ins and outs of that. But it looks to be sort of a narrow decision. But Roberts and Barrett ruled with sided with the liberals. So it was a 5-4 decision only, which I don't know. To me, that wasn't encouraging. Only a 5-4 decision, and I think it's pretty narrow that it only restores money that really has already been for services already rendered by contractors. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, more or less. Okay, so the first thing to understand about this case is that it's in a very peculiar procedural posture, right? So the district court, this is Judge Ali, who has been on the bench since December. So he's like a brand new judge. All of these plaintiffs, who are all people that USAID or state or somebody subject to the freeze depends on their money, and so they're saying basically this is an impoundment. You can't not spend this money. Judge Ali issues a temporary restraining order. That is an order that says the government can't freeze this money while we're litigating the question. We gotta have a freeze on the freeze, so to speak, while we figure things out. But the government then doesn't turn around and open the spigots again, depending on whom you believe, either because they're defying the order or because there's some genuine confusion about what it means, blah, blah, blah. But in any event, they don't turn the spigots back on. Judge Ali, at the request of the plaintiffs, then issues an order to compel compliance and orders this $2 billion for stuff work that's already been done to be paid by a date and time certain, which was, I believe, last week, Wednesday at midnight. And the government takes that order up, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, which this morning ruled. So the good news, if you want these organizations to get their money and want the spigots to be turned back on, is that Judge Ali's order was upheld. And it was upheld in a brief one-paragraph order that you can say the liberal justices and two of the conservatives are all on, or as I prefer to say it, all the women and the Chief Justice, right? So it's a perfect gender split on the court other than the Chief, which, make of that what you will. And so the stay on the order to compel compliance with the temporary restraining order is now lifted, which means that the government has to pay out these $2 billion. That's very good news because that will be a lifeline to some of these organizations. And frankly, the instinct of the court not to treat this as a series of individual contract disputes, but as a policy that has legal implications as a policy affecting large numbers of groups is a positive thing. The negative thing is that there are 4 justices who would not have even done this. And, I suppose in the case of Alito, who wrote a 9-page dissent or an 8-page dissent, and Clarence Thomas, that's not at all surprising. But in the case of Neil Gorsuch, it's a little bit surprising. And in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, it's a little bit more surprising. And so I think there's a reasonable argument that it's definitely good news in the short term, but it may be very ominous news in the medium or long term in the sense that all the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse here need is to flip one woman justice or one man justice on Chief Justice on the merits of one of these issues in a more normal procedural posture, and all of a sudden there's a Supreme Court majority for what the administration is doing. And so I don't know whether to think about it as primarily a positive development or primarily a negative development. It's definitely a positive development in the short run, but what it is in the longer term, I really don't know.
Yeah, to me, Ben, if I can just clarify, I think what you're saying is that it has broader ramifications for the more general issue of impoundment, and that maybe this is a sign that 4 justices are actually indicating that they are kind of siding with Trump on that whole theory of the government doesn't have to spend money that Congress has already appropriated. Is that right?
Well, it may be right. I think the really key point here is we don't really know because of the posture of this case. But I think it's fair to say that 4 justices didn't look at a situation in which there is, in my judgment, pretty clearly an impoundment, or if not an impoundment, then a series of executive actions that raise significant impoundment adjacent questions, right? Some of them are going to be statutory, not constitutional. And 4 justices looked at that situation and didn't say, holy shit, that's a real problem that the courts need to be aggressive about dealing with. they looked at it and they said, maybe they can do it, maybe they can't do it, but we should treat them as routine contract disputes. And that strikes me as a bad place to start. It's not, as to Thomas and Alito, I think we know where they are at the back end too. But as to the other two, I don't start with the assumption that I know where Brett is going to be, or that I know where Gorsuch is going to be, and the fact that this is their starting place strikes me as dispiriting.
What,
Go ahead, Ev.
again, not a question asking in good faith, but do you think it represents a turning point in the sort of, and like, to borrow a term, the entitification of Brett Kavanaugh? Like, is there a turning point where he's no longer savable?
Well, query whether he's crossed that point. There is a justice appointed by Donald Trump who you walk into every case with knowing what her ideological presuppositions are, but also feeling like you're going to get a decent hearing on good arguments. And it's not Brett, it's Amy Coney Barrett. And I do start with the assumption that she's looking at every case with a fair and open mind. Now, are her methodological and ideological suppositions the same as mine? No. But do I think she's a fair and open-minded person who's serious about, taking law seriously? And yeah, I really do. And did I expect to think that about Brett Kavanaugh, at the time of his nomination? I did. And do I think that? And do I think that now? No. Now, look, my mind changed about him on fitness grounds when Blasey Ford came forward, but not on his intellect or his sort of intellectual. I want to say like his fairness or open-mindedness, right? That was a behavioral thing, but I think he's surprised in a number of ways. I wouldn't use the word enshittification, but I do think I do worry about his ongoing radicalization is the way I would put it.
So bottom line for USAID, it sounds like this is a fairly narrow restoration of some spending, but is there, the agency, is there any pending case on the broad question of whether Trump can just completely close an entire federal agency established by Congress?
Well, so yes, but remember, so that actually implicates, broadly speaking, two different baskets, right? One is firing all the people, and the other is curtailing the programmatic activity of the agency, which are really very different questions. And so they tend to be divided up, it's not can you gut USAID litigation? It's this one is, can you freeze all of the programmatic activity of USAID? And then the other one, or a different set of cases, is, can you get rid of all the personnel of USAID? There's a similar set of questions going on with respect to CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Board, where they've been a little bit clearer that they're actually shutting down the agency. They've kind of vacillated about that with respect to USAID. So, but I haven't followed that litigation as closely.
So bottom line is USAID for now is still essentially shuttered.
Well, so yes, but a group of organizations are going to be made whole with respect to back work, and that's very good because, among other things, a lot of these organizations are facing bankruptcy right now. They have major cash flow problems. And so, and some of these, are little humanitarian organizations that are actually doing really good work, and some of them are, you know, beltway. I don't like the term beltway bandits, but they're government contractor types, right? And I don't. It's not a bad thing that a bunch of these organizations should not be insolvent, right? So I don't want to minimize the importance of it, but there's a much larger corner of the same litigation, which is one of the ways that Secretary of State Pete Maraca, no, that was not either a joke or a slip of the tongue. I actually think we should call Pete Maraca the Secretary of State, because little Marco is just the marionette. But one of the things that Pete Maraca is doing to try to get around these set of rulings is, so Judge Ali made clear that most of these grants have the regs that authorize them have cancellation termination terms that include, we give you this grant, but if it becomes adverse to U.S. policy, it can be canceled, right? And so what they did was they sent thousands and thousands of individual termination notices. And the question that's now before Judge Ali is whether those are basically individual termination grants that are kosher under his ruling, because nothing about his ruling requires that you don't cancel any individual grant under the terms of that grant. Or, conversely, is it basically recreating the freeze by other means, right? And that question, how he handles that question and how it is handled on appeal is really going to be life or death for a lot of, but that doesn't involve the back work. That involves the work that they're, committed to, that they gave, that they gave the grant, and that these organizations did financial planning and hired on the basis of, right? How is the courts going to handle those? And is a kind of mail merge form letter, your grant is canceled because it no longer comports with U.S. policy? Is that a freeze that's banned by the order, the TRO, or is that a, hey, you're allowed to cancel a grant, and therefore you're allowed to cancel as long as you do them individually, by which you mean send a different letter, you can do 5,000 grants.
All right, thanks. I think I'm as clear as I will be, given that I have no legal background.
Well, I have a little bit of a legal background, and I'm not clear. I think nobody's really clear on this, because it's actually right. If you dive into a murky lagoon filled with muck, you're not going to see clearly. So we've got 7 minutes left, which means that if anybody has thoughts on whether you could build a large language model to write Trump speeches, or if you have other subjects, or if you want to ask questions about the cactus or the snowman, this is your chance to do it.
Speaking of muck, I think people are in suspense as to the outcome of my colonoscopy yesterday. So it was successful, everyone. I don't have to go back. And I am still alive. I thought I would die. I honestly was in very, very bad condition yesterday. It turns out that food is very essential, and when you can't eat food, it's really not good. But yeah, no, I was a successful colonoscopy patient, and I have a very pristine colon, and I'm sure everybody's thrilled to hear that. Ev,
Ben, do
How's your
you?
colon?
How's my colon? I think it's doing great. I think it's going great. Um, to close the episode off, so one thing that we're not noticing in Canada is that and I see that you guys are protesting and that are really involved in opposing to Trump, but we don't really see it from the media. We don't see huge protests. We see maybe a bunch of Democrats wearing pink and having like little we disagree, but there's no real action. We don't see like marches like they were in 2016 with the pink hats. We don't see any of it. Is it like, how can I communicate to the rest of the world? How could you communicate to the rest of the world that there's stuff going on? And is there stuff going on? Or it's just like the magnitude is not
I
the same?
share your frustration, Ev. I would love nothing more than to literally camp out on the mall with like hundreds of thousands of people. But I think there's a couple things that are going on here. First of all, someone, I forget who's told me this, maybe someone in the Greek course, I don't know, raised the point of a large sustained protest movement in the U.S. that gains that kind of attention is in America is challenging because we're so geographically dispersed. So we've had, and you've seen this play out in the last few weeks, in that there have been multiple, like almost daily protests around the country, generally anti-Trump, anti-Doge, in
Well, the Proud Boys have been capable of doing it.
yeah, I mean, but again, I think
They
there's a
don't
lot
put
more
out
going on.
large numbers.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more going on than is like getting media attention because it's very diffuse and it's very dispersed. I think also the fact that the Democrats don't, there's not a clear leader right now to sort of galvanize people. So it's very, whatever's going on is very grassroots, and the Democrats seem, confused about the best strategy right now. I think you might see that shift a little bit over the budget issue. They may galvanize people. But then I also heard, and again, sorry, my brain is such that I'm not properly crediting people. I heard some commentary yesterday on some podcast Lily listened to as I was coming out of anesthesia and getting so, again, don't remember, about just the Democrats having concerns about calling for like people to pour into the streets because they know that this could give Trump the pretext of basically invoking the Insurrection Act or the some emergency powers. The name of the law escapes me. Ben, help me out if you can.
Insurrection
But
Act.
yeah. So that basically that's what he's like dying to do anyway, and that if they pour people, if they call for people and are able to mobilize people in such large numbers, and especially if there's any sort of violent element amongst them, which unfortunately there often is in large crowds, that this would give him what he wants, and that it would actually be a very dangerous thing. So I've heard mixed things, different opinions on why that is, but I'm frustrated. Like I have gone to small protests, but I want to go to large. I want to see large protests myself, even with the risks.
Okay, so a couple thoughts on this. The first is that in order to have large protests, you have to have unified demands. And one of the things that's going on because of the everything, everywhere, all at once approach of the administration is that very different groups of people are upset for very different reasons. And while there's, is a protest about Doge, is a protest about firings of forest rangers is a protest about foreign aid, and nurses in Malawi is a protest about the FBI. And so I think it would actually be easier if there were obviously one thing that people were rallying about. Um, right now, the thing to rally about is just this general no, which this general sense of we don't consent to this, right? Is it about Ukraine, right? So I think that's actually a big part of the problem. I also think the weather is an issue. People, as somebody who's been out projecting, this is not weather in which you're going to spend a lot of time outdoors. You can do a couple hours, but if you're going to bring in, 200,000 people from out of town, it's really better in the springtime. And so I would actually look up, I would actually look for things to pick up when what the Taliban would call the fighting season begins, which is really more in April.
Well, I mean, it's encouraging for us Canadians. At least if they can't protest in the cold, they can invade us in the cold.
That's right. It's look, we're going to be able to get through. You're going to get through this winter without an invasion, and I think that's good evidence. Look, folks, we're going to leave it there. We're going to be back tomorrow. I'm going to be in the hammock. I don't know where you guys are going to be, but I'm not going to be on a train tomorrow. And so until between then and now, keep the faith. Find somewhere cool to give some money to, and be be a good person. Do something nice for somebody. Thanks, guys.